Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and remember, the Context is Everything Media Network founder and CEO is John Michael, and he's reading a textbook, cover to cover. Here we're on page 416 of this textbook. Continue listening to hear more. Let's do a review of yesterday's reading. Yesterday's reading being chapter 17, section 1. Extending Spanish power. Here's the review. In 1492, Isabella financed Columbus's voyage, leading to the Spanish conquest of the Americas. By the 1500s, Spain had emerged as a modern European power under King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella. In 1519, their grandson Charles V inherited the crown of Spain and the Habsburg Empire, including the Holy Roman Empire and the Netherlands. Philip II and his divine right. During his 42-year reign, King Philip II made Spain the foremost power in Europe through expanding Spanish influence and strengthening the Catholic Church. He further centralized royal power and saw himself as an absolute monarch, ruling by divine right. Philip's devotion to the Catholic Reformation led him to enforce religious unity and turn the Inquisition against Protestants and heretics. Philip II fought wars to expand Spanish Catholic power. In 1571, he won a great victory against the Ottomans at Lepanto. Spain's golden age spanned from 1550 to 1650 and was the time of artistic and literary brilliance. King Philip II was the patron of the arts and established academies for science and mathematics. The period produced famous painters such as El Greco and Diego Velázquez, as well as outstanding writers including Lope de Vega and Miguel de Cervantes, whose Don Quixote mocked Spain's feudal past while admiring both earthly realism and heroic idealism. In the 1600s, Spain's power declined due to poor leadership, economic problems, neglect into farming and commerce, heavy taxation, and skilled artisans leaving. Inflation rose, and France replaced Spain as Europe's most powerful nation. On to today's reading. And if you made it this far, please like and subscribe. Section 2, Chapter 17, France, under Louis XIV. Setting the scene. I've had an idea that will give much pleasure to people here, wrote Louis XIV, the young king of France. His plan was to throw a grand party. Each guest would receive a lottery ticket for a prize of jewelry, and every ticket would be a winner. At Louis's bidding, At Louis's bidding, some 600 noble guests flocked to the royal palace for a week of sumptuous feasts, pageants, sports, dances, plays, and music. This extravaganza was the first of many spectacles organized by Louis XIV. By the late 1600s, Louis was absolute monarch of France and the most powerful ruler in Europe. Yet, just 100 years earlier, France had been torn apart by turbulent wars of religion. Rebuilding France. From 1560s to 1590s, religious wars between Huguenots, French Protestants, and Catholic majority tore France apart. Leaders on both sides used the strife to further their own ambitions. That's what they say, right? They say, always invest when things are down, or something like that. That's what they did. Took advantage of the fights. The worst incident began in St. Bartholomew's Day, August 24th, 1572, as Huguenot and Catholic nobles gathered to celebrate a royal wedding. Violence erupted that led to the massacre of 3,000 Huguenots. In the next few days, thousands more were slaughtered. For many, the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre symbolizes the complete breakdown of order in France. King Henry the Fourth? Who's this? Henry the Fourth. It doesn't say King Henry. It says Henry the Fourth. In 1589, a Huguenot prince inherited the French throne, Henry the Fourth. Knowing that a Protestant would face severe problems ruling a largely Catholic land, he became Catholic. Paris is well worth a mass, he is supposed to have said. To protect Protestants, however, he issued the Edict of Nantes in 1598. It granted the Huguenots religious toleration and let them fortify their own towns and cities. Henry IV then set out to heal his shattered land. His goals, he said, was not the victory of one sect over another, but his goal was a chicken in every pot. A good Sunday dinner for every peasant. Under Henry, a government reached into every area of French life. Royal officials administered justice, improved roads, built bridges, and revived agriculture. By building royal bureaucracy and reducing the influence of the nobles, Henry IV laid foundations for royal absolutism. Richelieu, Cardinal Armand de Richelieu. When Henry IV was killed by an assassin in 1610, his 9-year-old son, Louis VIII, inherited the throne. For a time, nobles reasserted their power. Then, in 1624, Louis appointed Cardinal Armand Richelieu his chief minister. This cunning, capable leader spent the next 18 years strengthening the central government. Again, this book mentions strong central government very often. Just a note. Richelieu sought to destroy the power of the Huguenots and nobles, two groups that did not bow to royal authority. He smashed the walled cities of the Huguenots and outlawed their armies, while still allowing them to practice their religion. At the same time, he defeated the private armies of the nobles and destroyed their fortified castles. While reducing their independence, Richelieu tied nobles to the king by giving them high posts at court or in the royal army. Richelieu handpicked his able successor, Cardinal Jules Mazarin. When 5-year-old Louis XIV inherited the throne in 1643, a year after Richelieu's death, Mazarin was in place to serve as chief minister. Like Richelieu, Mazarin worked tirelessly to extend royal power. Louis XIV, the Sun King. Soon after Louis XIV became king, disorder again swept France. In an uprising called the Fronde, noble merchants, peasants, and the urban poor rebelled. Each group was for its own reasons. On one occasion, rioters drove the boy king from his palace. It was an experience Louis would never forget. So Louis took over in 1643. When Mazarin, his one of his royal officials, when Mazarin died in When Mazarin died in 1661, Louis resolved to take over the government himself. "I have been pleased to entrust the government of my affairs to the late cardinal," he declared. "It is now time that I govern them myself." I am the state. Like his great-grandfather Philip II of Spain, Louis IV firmly believed... I don't think they meant Louis IV, did they? Yeah, they meant... The book has a typo, it looks like. Here, it says Louis IV when I think they mean Louis XIV. Like his grandfather Philip II of Spain, Louis XIV firmly believed in the divine right. He wrote, "God's power is felt in an instant from one end of the world to the other. Royal power takes the same to act throughout the kingdom. It preserves the order of the whole kingdom, as does God with the whole world." Louis XIV quoted from Absolutism and Revolution. Louis took the sun as a symbol for his absolute power. Just as the sun stands at the center of the solar system, he argued, the Sun King stands at the center of the nation. Louis is often quoted as saying, "L'état c'est moi. L'état c'est moi. I am the state." During his reign, Louis did not once call a meeting of the Estates General, the medieval council made up of representatives of all French social classes. In fact, the Estates General did not meet between 1614 and 1789. Thus, unlike the English Parliament, the Estates General played on the role of checking royal power. Strengthening royal power. Louis spent many hours each day attending to government affairs. To strengthen the state, he followed the policies of Richelieu. He expanded the bureaucracy and appointed intendants, royal officials who collected taxes, recruited soldiers, and carried out his policies in the provinces. The office of intendant and other government jobs often went to wealthy middle-class men. In this way, Louis cemented ties between the middle class and the monarchy. Under Louis XIV, the French army became the strongest in Europe. The state paid, fed, trained, and supplied up to 300,000 soldiers. Louis used this highly disciplined army to enforce his policies at home and abroad. Colbert and the economy. Louis's brilliant finance minister, Jean-Baptiste Colbert, followed mercantilist policies to bolster the economy. Colbert had new lands cleared for farming, encouraging mining and other basic industries, and he built up luxury trades such as lace making. To protect French manufacturers, he put high tariffs on imported goods. He also encouraged overseas colonies such as New France in North America to regulate trade with the colonies to enrich the royal treasury. Colbert's policies helped make France the wealthiest state in Europe. Yet, Louis XIV was often short of cash. Not even the financial genius of Colbert could produce enough income to support the huge costs of Louis's court or pay for his many foreign wars. Is that Versailles? Is that Versailles? Versailles. Is that Versailles? Yes, it is. Symbol of royal power. In the countryside near Paris, Louis XIV turned a royal hunting lodge into an immense palace of Versailles. He spared no expense to make it the most magnificent building in Europe. Its halls and salons displayed the finest paintings and statues and glittering chandeliers or mirrors. In the royal gardens, millions of flowers, trees, and fountains were set out in precise geometric pattern. Versailles became the perfect symbol of the Sun King's wealth and power. As both the king's home and the seat of government, it housed at least 10,000 people, from nobles and officials to servants. Court ceremonies. Louis XIV perfected elaborate ceremonies and emphasized his own importance. Each day began with the king's bedroom with a major ritual known as the leveille, or rising. High-ranking nobles competed for the honor of holding the royal wash basin or handling the king's diamond-buckled shoes. At night, the ceremony was repeated in reverse. Wives of nobles vied to attend upon women of the royal family. Rituals such as the leveille served a serious purpose. French nobles were descendants of feudal lords who held power in medieval times. Left at their estates, these nobles were a threat to the power of the monarchy. But luring nobles to Versailles, Louis turned them into courtiers, angling for privileges rather than warriors battling for power. Louis carefully protected their prestige and left them free from paying taxes. Cultural flowering. The king and his court supported a splendid century of the arts. Louis sponsored musical entertainment and commissioned plays by the best writers. The age of Louis XIV was a classical age of French drama. Jean Racine wrote tragedies based on ancient Greek myths. The actor played Molière. Turned out comedies such as The Miser and poked fun at the French society. In paintings, music, architecture, and decorative arts, French styles became the model for all of Europe. In new forms of dance and drama, ballet gained its first great popularity in the French court. As the leading patron of the culture, Louis sponsored the French academies, which set high standards for both the arts and the sciences. And we're nearing the wrap-up point here today. Thank you for listening. If you've made it this far, please like and subscribe and leave a coin in the comments. Successes and failures. Louis XIV ruled France for 72 years. Whoa. Far longer than any other monarch. During his reign, French culture, manners, and customs replaced those of the Renaissance Italy as the standard for the European state. In both foreign and domestic affairs, however, many of Louis's policies were costly failures. Wars of Louis XIV. Louis XIV poured vast resources into wars, expanding French borders. At first, he did gain some territory. His later wars were disastrous, though, because rival rulers joined forces to check French ambitions. Led by the Dutch and the English, these alliances fought to maintain the balance of power and distribution of military and economic power that would prevent any one nation from dominating Europe. In the 1700s, Louis's grandson Philip V inherited the throne from Spain. Louis declared that the French in Spain must regard themselves as one. But neighboring powers, led by England, were determined to prevent this union. The War of the Spanish Succession. I've heard of that. The War of Spanish Succession dragged on until 1713, when the exhausted French signed the Treaty of Utrecht. Philip remained on the Spanish home, but France agreed never to unite the two crowns. Persecution of the Huguenots. Louis saw France's Protestant minority as a threat to religion and political unity. In 1685, he revoked the Edict of Nantes. More than 100,000 Huguenots fled France. The persecution of the Huguenots was perhaps the king's most costly blunder. The Huguenots had been among the most hard-working and prosperous of Louis's subjects. Their loss was thus a serious blow to French prosperous years under Louis's subject. I didn't read that right at all. The Huguenots had been among the most hard-working and prosperous of Louis's subjects. Their loss was a serious blow to the French economy, just as the expulsion of Muslims and Jews hurt Spain. And looking ahead, this is it. Thank you. Louis XIV outlived his sons and grandsons. When he died in 1715, his 15-year-old great-grandson inherited the throne. Louis XV. Although France was then the strongest state in Europe, years of warfare had drained the treasury. The prosperity nurtured by Colbert evaporated under the burden of bad harvests, heavy taxes, and other problems. Louis XV was too weak a king to deal with such problems. He devoted his days to pleasure, ignoring the growing need for reform. He often quoted his old proverb, "After us, the deluge." Deluge meaning downpouring, so bad. As you will read, the deluge came during the reign of the next king, Louis XVI. Let them eat cake. Have a good day. Thank you. Bye-bye. God bless.